cleaner finds old letter in the trash, and what she reads makes her faint from shock. Dorothy Wilson held the vacuum cleaner in one hand while emptying the trash bins in the luxurious office in downtown New York City. It was just another workday like so many others over the past 5 years, cleaning the same space where businesswoman Elizabeth Harrison ran her empire with an iron fist. As she began collecting the papers from the trash, a yellowed envelope slipped from her gloved hands and fell to the floor. Dorothy bent down to pick it up, noticing how old it looked and that it was still sealed. Something made her hesitate before tossing it into the garbage bag. Maybe it was the natural curiosity of someone who had spent her whole life settling for scraps, or perhaps a maternal instinct she had tried to bury decades ago. She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded an official letter dated 25 years earlier. The words seemed to dance before her eyes as she read. It was an adoption letter. Her heart raced when she saw her own name listed as the birth mother, and there on the adoptive mother's line was the elegant signature of Elizabeth Harrison, the very woman who treated her as if she were invisible every single day. Dorothy felt her legs tremble. The envelope slipped from her hands as she tried to steady herself against the desk. The discovery was impossible to process. For 5 years, she had cleaned that office, wiped that desk, organized those papers, never imagining she was so close to the daughter she had given up for adoption when she was just 25. The daughter she had dreamed of finding one day, but never had the courage to seek. Dizziness overwhelmed her. The last conscious thought she had was about Elizabeth's brown eyes, which had always reminded her of someone, though she could never place who. Now she knew. They were her own eyes, the ones she saw reflected in the mirror every morning. Dorothy fainted right there, in the middle of the office, the letter scattered around her. When she woke up, she was in the hospital. The nurse explained that she had been found unconscious at work and that Elizabeth had insisted on covering all the medical costs. Dorothy pretended not to remember what had happened, but kept the secret like a dangerous treasure close to her heart. She asked to keep the letter, claiming it had fallen from the trash and might be important. In the days that followed, Dorothy returned to work with a completely different gaze. She watched Elizabeth's every gesture, every expression, searching for similarities that now leaped out at her. The way Elizabeth bit her lip when concentrating was identical to her own habit. The tilt of her head to the left when deep in thought, even the way she gestured with her hands while speaking. Elizabeth noticed the change in her employees' behavior. Dorothy, who had always been discreet and efficient, now seemed to watch her constantly. There was something different in the cleaner's eyes, an intensity that unsettled her. "Dorothy, are you all right?" Elizabeth asked one Thursday morning, after noticing the woman had wiped the same desk 3 times in a row. "Yes, Miss Elizabeth. Sorry, I've been a bit distracted," Dorothy replied, trying to steady her voice. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story." The tension in the room was palpable. Elizabeth decided it might be time to find someone else to handle the cleaning. Dorothy was competent, but this strange behavior made her uncomfortable. During lunch, she spoke with Margaret, the housekeeper who had worked in her home for over 15 years. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about something," Elizabeth said, sitting in the kitchen of her Upper East Side mansion. "Of course, dear. What happened?" Margaret had practically raised Elizabeth after her adoptive parents died in an accident when she was 17. "Dorothy, our office cleaner, has been acting strange. She keeps staring at me all the time, like she's always analyzing something. I'm thinking of firing her." Margaret stopped peeling the potatoes and fixed her gaze on Elizabeth. "What kind of look does she have?" "It's hard to explain. It seems maternal, like she's known me for a long time, but at the same time, like she's discovering something about me." Margaret's face grew thoughtful. All these years, she'd held on to suspicions she'd never dared to share. The first time she saw Dorothy, 5 years ago, she'd been struck by how much she resembled Elizabeth, not just in facial features but in posture, even in unconscious gestures. "Elizabeth, before you make any decisions, let me talk to her. Sometimes people go through personal problems that affect their behavior at work." Elizabeth agreed but asked her to do it soon. She couldn't stand the strange atmosphere in the office any longer. The next morning, Margaret showed up at the office with some excuse to speak to Dorothy. She found her in the break room, making coffee. "Dorothy, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course, Miss Margaret." Dorothy wiped her hands on her apron, nervous. "Elizabeth mentioned you've been acting differently. Is something wrong?" Dorothy hesitated. She'd spent sleepless nights wondering whether she should tell someone about her discovery. Margaret had always been kind to her, one of the few who treated her with genuine respect. "Miss Margaret, can I trust you?" "Of course, my dear. I've been here so many years. I've seen it all with this family." Dorothy took a deep breath and told her about the letter, the devastating discovery, and how she didn't know what to do with the information. Margaret listened in silence, her face growing paler by the minute. "Do you have that letter with you?" Dorothy pulled the yellowed envelope from her bag. Her hands trembled as she handed it to Margaret, who read every word with growing attention. "Good heavens," Margaret murmured. "Dorothy, I always suspected. You two look so much alike, not just physically. Even the way you smile is the same. Do you think I should tell her?" "That's not a decision I can make for you, but I can help you find the right moment if that's what you want." Dorothy felt an immense relief at sharing the weight of the secret. For the first time in weeks, she could work without feeling like she might collapse at any moment. Meanwhile, Elizabeth began having strange dreams. Every night she saw a young woman holding a baby, crying uncontrollably, but she could never see the woman's face clearly. She'd wake up distressed, with a sense of loss she couldn't explain. During a routine session with her psychologist, Dr. Richard Thompson, she mentioned the nightmares. "Elizabeth, have you ever been curious about your biological origins?" "My parents were always very open about the adoption. They said my birth mother was very young and couldn't raise me. I never felt the need to look for her. And now, these dreams might be connected to some subconscious need for connection. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like something important is right in front of me, but I just can't see it." Dr. Richard suggested she explore these feelings further, perhaps by talking to people who'd been around her for a long time. That same week, Dorothy had a hypertensive crisis at work. The stress of keeping the secret, combined with the emotion of being near her daughter every day without being able to reach out, was taking its toll. Elizabeth found her sitting in the break room, head in her hands, clearly unwell. "Dorothy, you need to see a doctor." "Don't worry about me, Mom. It'll pass." "Of course I need to worry. You've worked with me for 5 years." Elizabeth was surprised by her own reaction. Normally she'd just be practical and send Dorothy home. But something compelled her to care for her. "I'll call my driver to take you to the hospital." "No, please. I don't want to be a bother." "It's no bother, Dorothy. It's the least I can do." At the hospital, while Dorothy waited in the emergency room, Elizabeth stayed by her side. For the first time, they talked about more than just work. "Dorothy, do you have family here in New York City?" "No, Mom. I came from the countryside many years ago. My family, well, it's complicated." "Did you have children?" Dorothy felt her heart race. "I had a daughter, but circumstances forced me to give her up for adoption when she was a baby." Elizabeth felt an inexplicable chill. "That must have been very hard." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her." "Did you ever try to look for her?" "I was always afraid. What if she's happy? What if I show up and ruin the life she's built? Sometimes it's better to leave things as they are." Elizabeth instinctively touched Dorothy's hand in a comforting gesture. "Maybe your daughter thinks about you too. Maybe she also wants to find you." Dorothy almost told her everything right then. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but the doctor arrived to call her, interrupting the moment. The tests revealed Dorothy had dangerously high blood pressure and needed medical follow-up. Elizabeth insisted on covering all treatment costs, an act that surprised even herself. Over the following weeks, an unusual routine developed. Elizabeth asked about Dorothy's health every day, and Dorothy made an effort to appear stronger than she really was. Margaret watched the two women with a heavy heart, knowing the truth that hung between them like a ghost. One day, Elizabeth brought some old photos she'd found in the attic to the office. They were pictures of her as a baby, taken shortly after her adoption. She left them on the desk while taking an important call. Dorothy came in to clean the room and saw the photographs. She immediately recognized the crib, the little yellow dress, even the stuffed animal she'd bought for her daughter in her final days of pregnancy. Her legs gave out and she had to sit in Elizabeth's chair to keep from falling. When Elizabeth finished the call and returned to the room, she found Dorothy discreetly wiping away tears. "Dorothy, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry, Mom, it's just... These photos are so beautiful. You were such a lovely baby." "Thank you. They're from my first weeks with my adoptive parents." Dorothy pointed to one of the pictures. "That little dress is so delicate. It must have been made with great care. Actually, according to my mother, it came with me from the orphanage. My birth mother must have made or bought it before giving me up." Dorothy pressed a hand to her chest. She had sewn that dress herself, spending nights working on it during her final weeks of pregnancy, imagining how beautiful her daughter would look wearing it. Have you ever wanted to meet your birth mother?" "When I was younger, I was very curious, but my parents were uncomfortable with the subject, so I stopped asking. After they passed, I tried a few times, but never seriously pursued it." "What if she appeared in your life today? What would you do?" Elizabeth paused to think. "Honestly, I think I'd be curious. I'd want to know why she made that decision, how her life turned out after. But I'd also be afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid to discover she never thought of me again after giving me up. Or worse, that she regretted it and suffered all these years because of me." Dorothy had to leave the room quickly before her tears turned into uncontrollable sobs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Margaret went to Dorothy's house for the first time. She lived in a small, simple apartment on the south side, but kept everything impeccably clean and organized. "Dorothy, I can't bear to see the two of you suffering like this. Elizabeth isn't sleeping well, and you're making yourself sick with worry. This situation needs to be resolved." "I know, Ms. Margaret, but how? How do I approach her and say, 'Hi, I'm your mother, the one who abandoned you 25 years ago. You didn't abandon anyone. You did what you thought was best for your daughter in an impossible situation.' Do you think she'll see it that way?" "Elizabeth is a fair woman. She'll want to understand the whole story before judging." Margaret told her how she'd met Elizabeth, still a teenager and angry over the loss of her adoptive parents. "She's always been someone who seeks the truth, even when it hurts. And she has a good heart, Dorothy. It's just protected by layers of forced independence. What if she hates me? What if she loves you?" Dorothy stayed awake all night, thinking about Margaret's words. The next day, Elizabeth arrived at the office earlier than usual. She found Dorothy already working, as always. "Dorothy, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mom." "What's it like to lose a child, even if it's giving them up for adoption?" Dorothy stopped cleaning and looked directly at Elizabeth. "It's like a part of you dies, but keeps living somewhere in the world. You spend your life wondering how that part is doing, if they're well, if they're happy, if they need you. And the guilt, how do you deal with that? Guilt is a fierce animal that lives in your chest and wakes up now and then to remind you that you failed at the most important moment. But with time, you learn that sometimes loving means letting go." Elizabeth felt a strange connection to those words. "Dorothy, can I confess something? Ever since I found out you had a daughter, I've been thinking about my birth mother. If she feels the things you just described." "I'm sure she does, Mom. A mother never forgets. Do you think she'd want to meet me?" Dorothy could barely breathe. "I think it would be the dream of her life." At that moment, Elizabeth's phone rang. It was her lawyer, Dr. Robert Wilson, with important news. "Elizabeth, do you remember asking me a few months ago to discreetly look into your biological origins?" "Yes, but I thought it hadn't led anywhere. Actually, I found some interesting information. Can I stop by this afternoon?" Elizabeth scheduled the meeting but spent the rest of the day anxious. Dorothy noticed her employer's unease and offered to make a calming tea. "Thank you, Dorothy. You always seem to know exactly what I need." "Maternal instinct, I suppose," Dorothy said without thinking. Elizabeth looked at her curiously. You really would have been a wonderful mother. I hope I was, in some way. When Dr. Robert arrived, he brought a folder of documents. Elizabeth asked Dorothy to stay in the room organizing some files. Elizabeth, I managed to track down the adoption records. Your birth mother's name was Dorothy Wilson Smith. She was 25 when you were born, single, and without financial resources. Dorothy dropped a stack of papers on the floor. The noise made Elizabeth and Dr. Robert turn toward her. Sorry. Slippery hands, Dorothy said, trembling. No problem. Continue, Dr. Robert. The adoption was facilitated by a social worker named Barbara Johnson, who has since passed away. But I found the last known address of your birth mother. Elizabeth held the paper with the address. Dr. Robert, this address, it's very close to here. Yes, she might still be living in New York City today. Dorothy quickly left the room, excusing herself to fetch more cleaning supplies. She rushed to the bathroom and called Margaret. Ms. Margaret, he found out. Her lawyer discovered my name, my address. What do I do? Calm down, Dorothy. Maybe it's destiny showing it's time to tell the truth. I can't. Not like this. Then let her come to you naturally. If the lawyer gave the address, she'll want to investigate. When Dorothy returned to the living room, Elizabeth was putting away the documents. Dr. Robert, how long would it take to locate this woman? If she still lives at the address we have, maybe a few days. Should I hire a private investigator? No. I think I'll try in person first. After Dr. Robert left, Elizabeth was alone with Dorothy in the room. Dorothy, can I tell you something? I think I'm going to try to find my birth mother. That's wonderful, Mom. I think it's a brave decision. I'm scared but also excited. What if she doesn't want to see me? Any mother would be happy to see her daughter again, Mom. Do you think so? Even after so long? Especially after so long. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She kept imagining what the meeting would be like, what kind of person her birth mother was, whether they looked alike. Dorothy also stayed awake, knowing the moment of truth was approaching quickly. The next morning, Elizabeth arrived at the office determined. Dorothy, I'll leave early today. I'm going to try to find my mother. Good luck, ma'am. I'm sure everything will work out. Elizabeth took the address and asked her driver, John, to take her there. When they arrived in the neighborhood, she realized it was the same one where Dorothy lived. A coincidence she found curious, but didn't think much of. The address led to an old but well-kept building. Elizabeth went up to the third floor and rang the doorbell of apartment 32. An elderly woman answered. Good afternoon. I'm looking for Dorothy Wilson Smith. Dorothy? She moved about 6 years ago. But I have her new address. We're friends. The woman wrote the address on a piece of paper. Elizabeth recognized the street. It was the same one where she knew Dorothy, her employee, lived. Her heart raced with an impossible suspicion. Do you know if she had any children? Oh, yes. She always talks about a daughter she gave up for adoption many years ago. It's the greatest sorrow of her life, poor thing. Elizabeth thanked her and hurried down the stairs. In the car, she asked John to take her to the new address. Her hands trembled as she checked the building number. It was exactly the same address Dorothy had provided in her work documents 5 years earlier. John, wait here, Elizabeth said, stepping out of the car on shaky legs. She went up to the 4th floor and stopped in front of apartment 41. On the other side, she could hear the sound of a TV. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door opened and Dorothy appeared, wearing casual clothes. When she saw Elizabeth, she turned pale. Miss Elizabeth, what? How? Dorothy. Or should I say, Mom? The two women stared at each other in silence for a moment that felt like an eternity. Dorothy began to cry. You knew, Elizabeth said, not as a question but as a statement. I found out a few weeks ago. I found the adoption letter in your trash. And you didn't tell me. How could I? How do I tell my employer that I'm the mother who abandoned her? You didn't abandon me, Dorothy. You gave me a chance at a better life. Dorothy broke down in tears. Elizabeth stepped into the apartment and closed the door behind her. Can I hug you? Dorothy asked hesitantly. Elizabeth opened her arms, and the two embraced for the first time in 25 years. They cried together, all the pent-up emotions finally pouring out. "I thought about you every day," Dorothy said, "every single day of my life. I always knew there was something special about you. From the very first day she worked with me, I felt a connection I couldn't explain." They sat on Dorothy's simple sofa and talked for hours. Dorothy shared about her pregnancy at 25, about Elizabeth's father who promised to marry her, but disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy, about the extreme poverty that forced her to make the hardest decision of her life. Elizabeth told her about her happy childhood with her adoptive parents, the pain of losing them so young, and how Margaret became her only family. "Does Margaret know?" Elizabeth asked. She suspected. "She's the one who helped me keep the secret until now. She's always been able to see through people. That's why I trust her so much." When the sky began to darken, Elizabeth realized she had spent the entire day there. "Dorothy, Mom. Can I call you Mom?" "Yes, my daughter. You can." "Mom, I want you to stop working as a cleaner at my office. I want you to work with me as my personal assistant." "Elizabeth, I don't have the education for that. You have something much more valuable. You have real love for me, and I need to learn how to have a mother again," Dorothy agreed, still in disbelief at how her life had turned around in just a few hours. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, news of the discovery spread among the employees at Elizabeth's company. Some reacted with genuine surprise, others with malicious comments about the unusual situation. Michael Brennan, the minority partner of the company and Elizabeth's former suitor, was one of the most resistant to the change. "Elizabeth, are you sure about this? That woman could be taking advantage of your emotional vulnerability." "Michael, she didn't know who I was when she started working with me. It was a real coincidence." "Coincidences like that don't happen. She must have investigated, found out, and set this all up." Elizabeth grew irritated by her partner's suspicion. "Why can't you accept that sometimes fate puts the right people in the right place? Because in the business world, Elizabeth, coincidences like this are usually well-planned schemes." Michael's distrust planted a seed of doubt in Elizabeth's mind. What if Dorothy had actually discovered her identity beforehand and orchestrated the whole encounter? What if the letter hadn't fallen by accident but had been left there on purpose to be found? For a few days, Elizabeth watched Dorothy more closely, looking for signs of deceit or manipulation. But all she saw was a woman genuinely moved to have reunited with her daughter, trying to adapt to this new reality without losing her naturalness. Dorothy noticed the change in Elizabeth's behavior and grew distressed. She talked to Margaret about her worries. "She's doubting me, Miss Margaret. I think someone said something to her." "It was probably Michael. He's always been jealous of how close others are to Elizabeth. What if she decides I really set this all up? What if she sends me away?" "Dorothy, the truth has its own strength. Sooner or later, she'll see that your feelings are genuine." To prove her honesty, Dorothy decided to do something she hadn't planned. She brought Elizabeth a box she had kept for 25 years, filled with memories of her pregnancy and her daughter's first days of life. "Elizabeth, I want to show you something." She opened the box on the office desk. Inside were ultrasound photos, the hospital bracelet, a diary with notes about the pregnancy, and an unsent letter. "What is this?" Elizabeth asked, moved. "It's everything I kept of you. This letter. I wrote it on the day I gave you up, but I could never send it." Elizabeth read the letter with tears in her eyes. It was a painful goodbye, where Dorothy explained her decision and promised to love her daughter forever, even from afar. "My love," the letter said, "I hope you never need to read these words because that would mean I was too weak to raise you. But if you are reading this, know that this is the hardest decision of my life. I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you a chance to have everything I can't provide. You'll have a family who loves you, a beautiful home and education opportunities. I'll only have the certainty that I did what was best for you, even if it tears me apart inside." Dorothy, Elizabeth said, no one would stage such an elaborate lie for 25 years. Forgive my suspicion. You don't need to apologize, my dear. I understand your doubts. From that day on, their relationship deepened quickly. Dorothy moved into the maid's quarters in Elizabeth's mansion, which Elizabeth insisted on completely renovating. Mother, you're not a servant here, you're family. But I'd feel more comfortable contributing in some way. Then be my assistant. Help me with the business. Bring your life experience to our decisions. Dorothy accepted the new role but insisted on fair pay, not wanting to seem like she was taking advantage. The adjustment wasn't easy. Elizabeth was used to total independence, and Dorothy still felt unsure about her place in her daughter's life. There were moments of tension, especially when others commented on the unusual situation. One day, during a business meeting, a client made a disrespectful remark about Dorothy in front of Elizabeth. Interesting, Elizabeth. Your new assistant seems to have gone straight from the slums to the corporate world. Elizabeth stood up, furious. Mr. Thompson, I suggest you reconsider your views on social class and competence. Dorothy has more practical wisdom than most executives I know. I didn't mean to offend. I just observed that the meeting is over. My company doesn't do business with prejudiced people. After the client left, Dorothy thanked Elizabeth for defending her but was visibly shaken. Elizabeth, maybe it's not a good idea for me to attend these meetings. I could hurt your business. Mother, if my clients can't see your worth, then they don't deserve my work. Elizabeth's stance strengthened their bond even more. Dorothy began to see that her daughter had grown into not just a successful woman, but a fair and loyal one. Margaret watched their relationship blossom with joy, but also concern. Michael Brennan wasn't happy with the direction the company was taking under Dorothy's influence. Margaret, Michael said during a visit to the mansion, you need to open Elizabeth's eyes. That woman is gaining too much sway over her. Michael, Dorothy is her mother. It's natural they'd have a strong connection. A connection that could be exploited by the wrong people. Do you think Dorothy has ulterior motives? I think anyone poor who suddenly gains access to a fortune might be tempted. Margaret disagreed, but the conversation left her thoughtful. What if Michael had a point? That same week, something happened that tested everyone's trust. Dorothy received a strange call from a man claiming to know her story. Dorothy Wilson, this is Frank Jenkins. I heard you found your daughter. Who are you? How did you get my number? I'm an investigative journalist. I'm working on a story about family reunification and would like to interview both of you. We're not interested in interviews. I imagine not, especially considering the circumstances of the pregnancy. Dorothy felt a chill. What circumstances? The baby's father. He was married, wasn't he? William Harrison, son of the owner of the company where you worked as a cleaner 26 years ago. Dorothy nearly dropped the phone. How did this man know that? I don't know what you're talking about. Dorothy, I have documents, I have photos, and I have testimonies from people who worked with you back then. William Harrison got you pregnant and then disappeared. He was married and had to choose between his official family and his pregnant mistress. You're mistaken. Am I? Then why did William Harrison leave a bank account in his daughter's name that was never accessed? Why did he move abroad right after the child was born? Dorothy hung up the phone, trembling. She had kept this secret for 25 years, hoping she'd never have to reveal it. William was indeed married when they got involved, and he did flee when he found out about the pregnancy, but she never knew about any bank account or inheritance. That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. If that journalist published the story, Elizabeth would find out her father wasn't just an irresponsible young man, but a married man who had betrayed his family. The next day, Dorothy arrived at the office nervous and distracted. Elizabeth noticed immediately. Mum, is something wrong? No, everything's fine. It's not. You look like you didn't sleep. Dorothy hesitated but decided to tell her about the call. She only left out the details about William being married. A journalist wants to do a story about us. He said he has information about your father. Elizabeth was intrigued. What kind of information? I don't know. I hung up on him. Mum, Maybe it's worth hearing what he has to say. I've always been curious about my biological father. Elizabeth, some truths are better left buried. Why? What could be so terrible? Dorothy didn't know how to answer without lying directly to her daughter. That afternoon, Frank Jenkins called again, but this time to Elizabeth's office. Ms. Harrison, I'm Frank Jenkins, a journalist. I'd like to speak with you about your family origins. My mother mentioned you called. What information do you have about my father? I'd prefer to talk in person. Can I stop by today? Elizabeth agreed to meet, despite Dorothy's protests. When Frank arrived, he carried a folder full of documents. He was a middle-aged man with a professional demeanor, but an ambitious gleam in his eyes. Ms. Harrison, your father's name is William Harrison. He worked at the family company when he met your mother. Harrison. The same last name as mine? Coincidence? Not exactly. When your adoptive parents took you in, they kept your biological father's last name for legal reasons related to an inheritance. Elizabeth looked at Dorothy, who was visibly uncomfortable. What inheritance? William left a bank account in your name before leaving for Europe. He never returned to the United States, but kept depositing money into the account until he passed away 3 years ago. How much money? Almost $2 million. Elizabeth was stunned. $2 million, and no one told me? The bank tried to locate you several times, but your adoptive parents always intercepted the mail. After they passed, you had moved and they lost track. Dorothy was pale. If William had left that much money, it meant he truly cared about his daughter. Maybe the story was more complicated than she'd thought. Where is my father now? Elizabeth asked. He passed away in England 3 years ago. Cancer. But before he died, he hired a law firm to find you. Frank handed her a sealed envelope. This letter was written by him shortly before his death. Elizabeth opened the letter with trembling hands. She read silently, her expression changing with each line. Mom, she said finally, he explains everything here. He was married when you met, but they were separating. When I found out about the pregnancy, I wanted to take responsibility for you, but his wife threatened to kill herself and stopped him from doing it. He left for Europe to earn money and come back for us. Dorothy began to cry. Did he really write that? He says he never stopped thinking about us, that he deposited money into the account every month, hoping one day you could use it to find us and raise you with dignity. Frank interrupted the moment. There's just one problem. To access the inheritance, you need to prove the family connection through a DNA test. That's not a problem, said Elizabeth. We can do it today. Actually, there's a complication. The bank requires the test to include genetic material from the father as well. They kept samples for this purpose. So, what's the issue? The cost of the international legal process, it's about $50,000 just to get started. Elizabeth grew suspicious. And why are you telling us all this? Because I can help you. I have contacts at the bank. I can speed up the process. In exchange, I'd like exclusive rights to the story for my magazine. Dorothy finally understood what was happening. Elizabeth, I think this is a scam. What do you mean, Mom? This man wants money up front and a sensational story. The inheritance might not even exist. Frank was offended. Ma'am, I'm a respected journalist. All the documents are real. Then why can't we verify them directly with the bank? Elizabeth asked. You can, of course, but it'll take months, maybe years. My method is faster. Elizabeth asked Frank to leave the documents for review and promised to give him an answer in a few days. After he left, mother and daughter talked about the situation. Elizabeth, I never told you your father was married because I didn't want you to think poorly of him, but now I don't know what to believe. Mom, whether it's true or not, we don't need this inheritance. We have each other, and that's more than I ever dreamed of my whole life. Dorothy hugged her daughter, moved by her wisdom. In the following days, they quietly investigated the truth behind the information. They discovered Frank was indeed a journalist, but had recently been fired for fabricating stories. The documents seemed authentic, but could have been forged. They decided to contact the bank in England directly. After much bureaucratic effort, they confirmed there was indeed an account in Elizabeth's name, but the amount was far less than Frank had claimed, about $200,000, not $2 million. "Mum, the inheritance exists, but Frank lied about the amount and tried to deceive us. What do you want to do?" "I want to recover the money my father left, but not out of greed. I want to use it to start a social project in his memory." "What kind of project?" "A support center for young mothers in vulnerable situations, so no woman has to go through what you did." Dorothy was moved by the idea. It would be a way to turn our pain into something positive. They began the proper legal process to access the inheritance, taking their time and avoiding upfront payments to shady intermediaries. Frank tried pressuring them a few times, but gave up when he realized he couldn't fool them. Over the following months, as they waited for the process to conclude, Dorothy and Elizabeth worked together on developing the social project. Dorothy contributed her life experience and understanding of struggling mothers' real needs, while Elizabeth used her business skills to structure the center. Their relationship deepened during this time. They learned to embrace their personality and social background differences, creating a unique and special family dynamic. Margaret watched everything with joy, seeing the house finally filled with the family life that had always been missing. Michael, on the other hand, remained resistant to Dorothy's presence, especially since she had become Elizabeth's informal business advisor. "Elizabeth," Michael said during a partners' meeting, "your recent decisions have been too emotional. You're letting your heart influence your head too much." "Michael, my mother has a practical wisdom that many business people lack. She understands people in a way numbers can't show. She has no training to give business advice. And you have no authority to question my decisions. I'm the majority partner in this company." The tension between Elizabeth and Michael reached its limit when he discovered she planned to use part of the company's profits to fund the maternal support center. "This is fiscal irresponsibility, Elizabeth. We can't use company resources for personal projects." "It's not a personal project, it's social responsibility. Social responsibility that coincidentally benefits your mother's story." "Michael, if you don't agree with the direction I'm taking the company, you can sell your shares. Maybe that's exactly what I'll do." That night, Elizabeth talked to Dorothy about the situation. "Mom, Michael is pressuring me to choose between you and the company. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm getting in the way of your business. He's not right. You've brought me a human perspective I was missing. My company is closer to people now, and that's good for business too. But if you lose your partner, then I lose him. But I won't lose you again." Elizabeth's determination deeply moved Dorothy. She realized her daughter had become a woman of strong principles, capable of prioritizing relationships over profit. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Michael showed up at the company with a proposal. "Elizabeth, I spoke to my wife about our situation. She made me realize I might be resisting change out of fear of losing our friendship." "Michael, our friendship doesn't have to depend on business." "I know, and that's why I want to propose something different. Instead of selling my shares, what if we make the Maternal Support Center an official branch of the company, a social arm that could even generate positive returns for our corporate image?" Elizabeth was surprised by his change of heart. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I admit I was prejudiced against your mother, but she's proven to have valuable insights about human management." Dorothy, who had overheard the conversation from the hallway, entered the room with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Michael, thank you for giving me a chance. Dorothy, I'm the one who owes you an apology. I let fear of the unknown override my common sense." From that day on, the company officially began preparing to launch the Dorothy Wilson Center for Maternal Support. The name was chosen by Elizabeth as a tribute to her mother and her journey of overcoming. When the inheritance was finally released 6 months later, Elizabeth used all the money as seed capital for the center. The inauguration ceremony was scheduled for a special date, Elizabeth's 26th birthday, exactly 1 year after their reunion. On opening day, local officials, business people, and dozens of women who would benefit from the project attended. Dorothy spoke publicly for the first time, sharing her story and explaining the center's mission. 26 years ago, she said, I made the hardest decision of my life. Today, that pain turns into hope for other women facing the same situation. No mother should have to choose between loving her child and securing their future. The audience was moved to tears by her speech. Elizabeth stepped onto the stage and publicly embraced her mother. "The Dorothy Wilson Center isn't just a social project," said Elizabeth. "It's proof that true love can overcome any obstacle, even 25 years of separation. It's proof that it's never too late to rebuild a family." In the months that followed, the center helped hundreds of women. It offered psychological support, job training, daycare for children, and guidance on social rights. Dorothy became the general coordinator, using her personal experience to connect with the women. One of the first women helped was Ashley, a 19-year-old pregnant girl abandoned by her boyfriend. Her story strongly reminded Dorothy of her own decades earlier. "Ms. Dorothy," Ashley said during a counseling session, "how did you manage to overcome the pain of giving up your daughter?" "I never fully overcame it, Ashley, but I learned that sometimes love requires sacrifices that seem impossible. What matters is being sure you're making the best choice for your child. What if I regret it? Regret will exist either way, but if you choose with love, you'll be able to live with that decision." Ashley decided to keep the baby and accepted the center's support for job training. She became one of the project's success stories. Elizabeth closely followed her mother's work, impressed by her natural leadership and empathy. "Mom, you should have been a social worker or psychologist." "Maybe in another life, my dear, but I don't regret the path I took. It brought me to you." The story of Dorothy and Elizabeth's reunion began spreading through the city. Many people came to the center seeking help to find lost relatives. Dorothy and Elizabeth decided to create a family reunification program as well. Michael, who had become an enthusiastic advocate for the project, suggested expanding to other cities. "Elizabeth, we have a model here that could be replicated across the country." "It's a dream, Michael, but let's take it slow. First, we want to solidify our work here." "I agree, but it's important to think about the future. You've created something revolutionary." National media began taking interest in the story. This time, unlike Frank Jenkins' sensationalist approach, serious journalists sought to document the social work being done. A special report aired on national television, showing the center in operation and telling Dorothy and Elizabeth's personal story. The impact was immense, with donations pouring in from across the country. "Mom," Elizabeth said after watching the report, "our story is helping other families reunite. It's amazing how a letter found in the trash could transform so many lives." "It wasn't the letter, Mom. It was the love that never died between us." A year after the center's opening, Dorothy and Elizabeth took a special trip. They went to the town where Dorothy had grown up to visit the grave of Elizabeth's grandmother and formally introduce her to her granddaughter. "Grandma," Dorothy said, kneeling before the headstone, "I've brought my daughter to meet you. She's become a wonderful woman, just as you predicted she would." Elizabeth placed flowers on the grave. "Thank you, Grandma, for teaching my mother to be strong. It was that strength that allowed her to make the right decision 26 years ago." On their way back, they stopped at the hospital where Elizabeth was born. They spoke with some older nurses who remembered the case. "Ms. Dorothy," one of them said, "I was on duty the night your daughter was born. I never forgot how you cried, yet at the same time were certain you were doing what was best for her." "It was the longest night of my life," Dorothy replied. "And also the most important," Elizabeth added, holding her mother's hand. 2 years after their reunion, the Dorothy Wilson Center had already helped over 1,000 women and facilitated 15 family reunifications. Dorothy had become a national reference in public policies for mothers in vulnerable situations, often invited to give lectures and participate in conferences. Elizabeth, inspired by the social work, decided to transform her entire company into a social impact corporation, focused on projects that benefited low-income families. "Mom," she said during an evening conversation in the mansion, "you completely changed my perspective on success." "How so?" "Before, I thought success was about money and power. Now I know success is making a difference in people's lives." "You always had that kindness, my daughter. You just needed to discover how to use it. You taught me. Even though you weren't present during my childhood, your love guided me somehow." Margaret, now over 70, watched the two women with pride. "I've never seen a family form so quickly and so strongly," she remarked. "Ms. Margaret," said Dorothy, "you were the bridge that kept us connected all these years. Without your care for Elizabeth, she wouldn't be the wonderful person she is today. And without your unconditional love for her, Dorothy, Elizabeth would never have learned to truly trust people." On the 3rd anniversary of their reunion, Dorothy and Elizabeth decided to write a book telling their story. They wanted to inspire other families separated by circumstances not to give up hope. During the writing process, they discovered details about their personalities they had never noticed before. Both had the habit of making lists to organize their thoughts. Both preferred bitter coffee. Both were afraid of heights but loved stargazing. "It's amazing how we carry traits of each other, even without living together," Elizabeth observed. "Like mother, like daughter, as they say. But it's more than that. It's the spiritual connection between mother and child." The book, Letters of Destiny, A Story of Reunion, was successfully launched nationwide. All proceeds went toward expanding the center to other cities. During the book signing, a woman approached Dorothy with tears in her eyes. "Miss Dorothy, I read your story and was inspired to look for my daughter, whom I gave up for adoption 15 years ago." "Did you find her?" "Yes. We're getting to know each other slowly, but she forgave me. She said she understood my decision after reading your book." Moments like this became frequent. Dorothy and Elizabeth's story had become a symbol of hope for separated families across the country. 5 years after their reunion, the Dorothy Wilson Center had branches in 10 U.S. cities. Dorothy had become a respected public figure, often consulted on family and social welfare policies. Elizabeth expanded her business to include a publishing house specializing in stories of resilience and a production company for social documentaries. It had all started with a letter found in the trash, but had grown into a national movement celebrating family bonds. One afternoon, while organizing old documents, Elizabeth found the original adoption letter, now yellowed and fragile. "Mom, look at this. The letter that changed our lives. It feels like just yesterday I found it in that trash can. Actually, it was 5 years ago. 5 years that feel like a lifetime of happiness." Dorothy carefully took the letter. "You know what moves me the most? Thinking that all those years I worked in your office, this letter was tucked away somewhere in your desk, waiting for the right moment to appear. Do you really believe it was destiny?" "I believe it was love. True love always finds a way to bring people who belong together back." Elizabeth hugged her mother, as they did every day before saying goodbye at the end of the workday. It was a ritual they had created to make up for all the hugs lost during their 25 years apart. "Mom, thank you for having the courage to give me up for adoption. If you hadn't done that, maybe I never would have become the person I am today. And thank you for forgiving me and letting me be your mother again. You've always been my mother, Dorothy. Always." That night, the two women had dinner together as they did every evening, talking about their plans for the center, the women they had helped that day, and their future projects. Margaret watched them from the kitchen, smiling as she saw how the table, once occupied only by Elizabeth for so many years, was now complete. When it was time for bed, Dorothy went to Elizabeth's room to say goodnight, just as a mother does for her daughter. It was another ritual they had created, a symbolic way of reclaiming all the nights they couldn't say goodbye. "Sleep well, my daughter." "Sleep well, Mum. See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow." Dorothy turned off the light and gently closed the door. In the hallway, she paused for a moment to look at the framed photo on the wall, one from the day the center opened, showing mother and daughter embracing, smiling at the future they had built together. The letter that once made her faint from shock was now framed on her desk at the center, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that true love can overcome any obstacle, even time. And so, Dorothy Wilson Smith and Elizabeth Harrison proved that some stories don't end with separation but begin with reunion. That destiny sometimes takes the most unlikely paths to bring hearts together, and that a letter found in the trash can be the start of the most beautiful love story between a mother and daughter. The end. Now, we'd love to hear what you thought of this touching story. Do you believe destiny can truly reunite a mother and daughter after so long? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. If you have a similar story or know someone who's been through something like this, share it with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartfelt stories like this one.